2 weeks before they cracked my chest open, I discovered exactly what I was worth to my only son. I was supposed to be napping. My cardiologist had ordered rest ahead of the triple bypass, so when David and Monica came by that Wednesday afternoon, I'd settled into the recliner in the sunroom, newspaper draped across my lap, eyes closed. Their voices carried from the kitchen with the sort of careless volume people use when they believe no one is listening. "The market will take the house in a weekend," Monica said, and I heard the refrigerator door close. "Shady Meadows has a bed opening the first week of April. If we time it right, he goes straight from the hospital." My newspaper didn't rustle. I'd spent 38 years as a high school principal. I knew how to stay still while students plotted behind my back, but my students never had my social security number. David's voice came lower, but the house has thin walls. He'll fight it. He won't have the strength after surgery. That's the point. Monica sounded almost cheerful. We'll frame it as temporary rehab. By the time he figures out it's permanent, the sale documents will be signed. Lily's college won't pay for itself. There was a pause. I could picture David running a hand through his hair, the way he does when he's persuading himself something unsavory is actually practical. Dad barely leaves the house anymore. The stairs are killing him. Selling is logical. My chest tightened, not from angina, from the quiet, thorough way they were dismantling my life. This house on Sycamore Lane was where Alina and I planted the Japanese maple the year David was born, where she died in the upstairs bedroom 8 years ago, holding my hand. David knew that. He, grown up in these rooms. They moved into the living room and I lost the thread of their words, but I'd heard enough. Shady Meadows, a place whose reputation I knew well from a former colleague's nightmare. Medication errors, bed sores, staff who treated residents like freight to be warehoused. They weren't offering me care. They were offering me a storage unit while they cashed out. I sat motionless until the front door clicked shut and their SUV backed out of the driveway. When I was certain they'd gone, I stood up and walked to the kitchen. Monica had left her coffee mug in the sink, lipstick still on the rim. I washed it by hand, dried it, put it away. Then I called my attorney. Part 2. Harold Hammond has been my lawyer for 30 years. His office smells of leather and peppermint, and he doesn't flinch when I tell him exactly what I need. I want David removed as executor. I want the house retitled into an irrevocable trust, beneficiary the Alina Vance Nursing Scholarship Fund at the university. My investment accounts get liquidated and split between the scholarship and St. Jude's Hospice. David and Monica receive $1 each. Lily gets a separate education trust, managed by a third-party trustee, payable directly to any accredited institution. Her parents cannot touch a single cent. Harold removed his glasses and polished them. He's known me since Alina's funeral. He's known David since the boy was in Little League. "You're certain about this, Arthur?" "I'm scheduled for open-heart surgery in 12 days. My son and his wife plan to move me into a facility with a 1-star state rating the moment I'm out of recovery so they can sell my house. I've never been more certain of anything." Harold nodded. We spent 3 afternoons drafting, signing, notarizing. I recorded a video statement on my phone, clear-eyed, firm-voiced, explaining my decisions and confirming I was of sound mind. I listed the reasons, including the conversation I'd overheard, date-stamped, and witnessed. Next, I visited Springwood Commons, an independent living community 40 minutes north. I toured a 2-bedroom condo with a balcony overlooking a pond. I wrote a check for the full purchase price and arranged for furnishings to be delivered the week after my surgery. The final piece was small but crucial. I installed a call recording application on my phone, tested it twice, and made sure it saved files to the cloud automatically. I knew my son's patterns. The moment he believed I was weak, he'd drop the performance. I left a sealed envelope with Harold containing my new address, my new will, and a letter thanking him for his friendship. Then I went home and watered Alina's roses. The bushes were still bare from winter, but I could feel the roots waiting beneath the soil. Part 3. Surgery day arrived gray and cold. David pulled up to the hospital entrance at 5:45 a.m., his jaw tight with the inconvenience of the early hour. Monica wasn't with him. "Big presentation at 9, he said, idling the car. "She sends her love." I lifted my overnight bag from the backseat. "Thank her for me." "I'll try to swing back this afternoon." He didn't look at me. "Text me when you're out." I stood on the curb and watched him drive away. A volunteer with a wheelchair asked if I needed help. I told her I could walk. The operation took 6 hours. When I surfaced in the cardiac ICU, a nurse named Grace was adjusting my oxygen, her face kind behind a surgical mask. "You did beautifully, Mr. Vance. Your son called, said to tell you he'll check in later." Later came at 4:30 p.m. I was propped against pillows, the anesthesia still a fog in my skull, when my phone buzzed on the bedside tray. I pressed record before answering. "Dad, how are you?" "I'm awake. Surgery went well." "Good, good." Rapid, distracted. Voices in the background, a restaurant maybe. "Look, something came up. We're stuck across town. Monica's got a migraine and I can't break away. The discharge people will release you tomorrow morning. Just call an Uber, you're a grown man." I let the silence stretch for 3 full seconds. "You want me to take a rideshare home from heart surgery?" "Dad, it's a car ride. Plenty of people do it. I'll Venmo you the fare." Venmo. My son wanted to reimburse me so I could taxi myself home with fresh stitches holding my sternum together. "All right," I said. "I'll figure it out." "Great, rest up." He hung up before I could reply. Grace came in moments later and found me staring at the phone. She asked if everything was okay. I told her I needed to arrange transportation for the next day and asked if she could witness something. She witnessed my signature on a printed copy of the recording's time stamp and listened to the file I saved. Her expression never changed, but her hand rested on my shoulder a beat longer than necessary. The next morning I called a taxi. I sat in the backseat, clutching a heart-shaped pillow to my chest to protect my incision, and watched my neighborhood scroll past. The house was empty when I arrived. I made myself soup, took my medications, and sat in the living room where Alina's photograph watches over the mantel. I had already won. I just needed to wait for the right moment to show them the scoreboard. Part 4. Recovery was slow, but solitude was something I'd learned to manage years ago. A home health aide visited twice a week. My sister Margaret brought casseroles. David and Monica appeared exactly twice, both times to mention downsizing opportunities. "You really should think about a place with support services," Monica said during their second visit, her tone dipped in faux concern. She handed me a brochure for Shady Meadows. "This one has excellent ratings." I turned it over. The cover photo showed a hallway with peeling baseboards. "I'll consider it," I said. David brightened. "That's all we ask, no pressure, we just want what's best." What was best, apparently, was liquidating my assets while I sat in a room smelling of industrial cleaner. I smiled and told them I'd have an answer soon. I also invited them to dinner the following Saturday. "There's something I want to announce, something financial. I'd like Margaret and Mrs. Calloway from next door to join us." Monica's eyes flickered. "Financial?" "I've been reviewing my estate plans. I think you'll both be pleased." The words worked like bait in a still pond. David nodded with the careful enthusiasm of a man who could already taste the commission. "Saturday, then. We'll bring wine." Saturday arrived. I had spent the previous day moving my most personal belongings: Alina's photographs, my grandfather's watch, the box of David's baby teeth I could no longer look at without a bitter ache, to the Springwood condo. The house on Sycamore Lane was already a shell by the time the doorbell rang. Margaret arrived first, her eyebrows knitting when she saw the sparse living room. "Arthur, where are your books?" "Packed," I said. "I'll explain later." Mrs. Calloway bustled in next, a plate of lemon bars in hand. She lived next door for 20 years and had watched David grow from a boy who delivered her newspaper into a man who no longer returned her waves. Finally, David and Monica pulled up. Monica wore a dress that probably cost more than my first car. David carried a bottle of Cabernet. Their smiles were polished, anticipatory. We ate roast chicken and scalloped potatoes. I made pleasant conversation, asked about Lily's dance recital, commented on the weather. I let the evening feel normal, warm, even. Then I set down my fork and stood up. Part 5. "I want to thank everyone for coming," I said, bracing one hand on the table for balance. My incision still pulled when I straightened fully, but I made sure my posture was perfect. I've been thinking a lot about family lately, about what we owe each other. David raised his glass. "Here, here." I didn't return the gesture. Instead, I reached into my pocket and retrieved my phone. "Before I make my announcement, I'd like to share something. A recorded conversation from the day of my heart surgery." Monica's smile froze. I pressed play. My voice, groggy with anesthesia. "You want me to take a rideshare home from heart surgery?" David's voice crisp and dismissive. "Dad, it's a car ride. Plenty of people do it. I'll Venmo you the fare." The recording played to its end. The dining room became a photograph, everyone motionless, suspended. Margaret's hand covered her mouth. Mrs. Calloway set down her fork with a deliberate click. David's face cycled through 3 expressions: shock, calculation, and then a brittle attempt at damage control. That's taken out of context. I was stuck in traffic. "You were at a restaurant," I said. The background noise was quite clear. Monica's voice turned sharp. "This is manipulation, recording your own son. That's low, Arthur." I didn't answer her. I lifted a manila folder from the sideboard and withdrew a sheaf of documents. "What's low is planning to warehouse your father in a substandard care facility so you can sell his house before his chest tubes are even out. I overheard that conversation 2 weeks before the surgery." The color drained from Monica's cheeks. David opened his mouth, but I kept going. "So I made some changes." I laid the documents flat on the table. "This house, as of last month, belongs to an irrevocable trust. Upon my death, it will be sold, and the proceeds will fund the Alina Vance Nursing Scholarship. My investment accounts have been liquidated and directed to the same scholarship and to St. Jude's Hospice. David, Monica, you each receive $1, the statutory minimum to prove I didn't forget you. Lily's education is fully funded, but the trust is administered independently. You cannot touch it, and you cannot influence it." David lunged to his feet, chair scraping hardwood. "You can't do this. I'll contest it." "You can try. I've recorded a video statement confirming my competence. My medical records are attached. Harold Hammond has the originals. This has been reviewed by 2 separate attorneys." I gathered my car keys from the sideboard. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a condo waiting. Margaret, Dorothy, thank you for being my witnesses tonight. The rest is between you and your consciences." Monica started to say something, her face mottled with fury, but I was already at the front door. I didn't slam it. I closed it gently, the way you close a book you've finished reading. Part 6. The legal storm David threatened never materialized. Harold told me later that their attorney took one look at the documentation and advised them to drop it. Everything had been executed with airtight precision. The $1 inheritance was a signature away from unassailable. But the real reckoning happened without lawyers. Margaret, who chairs the garden club and sings in the church choir, told the story with surgical efficiency. Mrs. Calloway, whose bridge circle includes half the school board, told it with embellished outrage. Within a month, David's real estate clients began canceling. Monica's book club invitation evaporated. Even the waiter at the country club where David had been having dinner the day of my surgery apparently asked another member if that's the fellow who made his dad take an Uber from Open Heart. I heard these details secondhand. I was too busy to track them myself. Springwood Commons welcomed me with a potluck dinner and a watercolor class. I bought new furniture, hung Aliner's photographs above a gas fireplace, and took morning walks around the pond. The community had a library, a small theater, and a roster of guest lecturers. I signed up to mentor student teachers at the nearby high school, something I'd missed without realizing it. David called once 6 weeks after the dinner. His voice was subdued, the swagger gone. "I'm under a lot of stress at work. I wasn't thinking clearly. Can we meet? I'd like to apologize properly." I agreed to coffee at a diner halfway between us. He showed up 10 minutes late, jittery, and delivered a speech about family pressure and Monica's influence and getting caught up in things. He never quite said the words, "I'm sorry I valued a real estate commission over your life," but the shape of it hovered in the air between us. I listened. Then I told him, "You're my son. That doesn't dissolve because of what happened, but trust is not a faucet you can turn back on when you're thirsty. The inheritance is gone and it stays gone. If you want a relationship, we'll build it slowly on honest terms with no money attached." He looked disappointed. That told me everything I needed to know, but he nodded and said he'd try. I paid for the coffee and drove home to my condo, where the pond caught the sunset and my watercolor paint sat waiting. Part 7. A year later, I sat in the third row of a grade school auditorium, watching Lily perform as a sunflower in the spring musical. She spotted me in the crowd and waved, petals wobbling on her costume. Margaret was next to me, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. David and Monica sat several rows back. We'd arrived separately, exchanged civil nods, and agreed silently that Lily was the priority. After the curtain call, Lily ran to me first. "Grandpa, did you see me? I didn't forget my line." I hugged her tightly, mindful of the fatting scar beneath my shirt. "You were magnificent." David approached carefully, hands in his pockets. Over the past months, we'd managed a handful of cautious lunches. He started therapy, Monica had refused, and their marriage was reportedly strained, but he'd stopped making excuses. "The last time we met," he'd said without prompting, "I was a coward and a selfish one. I don't expect you to forget." I hadn't forgotten. I never would. But I'd watched him show up for Lily's soccer games, heard from Margaret that he'd volunteered for a charity 5K, seen him try to become someone who didn't measure love by square footage. That evening back at my condo, I found a letter in my mailbox. Hand addressed, no return label. Inside, David had written 3 paragraphs in his cramped handwriting. He thanked me for coming to the play. He said he'd been thinking about the day he dropped me at the hospital, the way I'd stood on the curb without complaint, and how long it had taken him to understand that dignity was not weakness. He didn't ask for money, didn't mention the house or the trust. He wrote, "I want to earn my way back however long it takes, not as an heir, as your son." I read it twice. Then I sat on my balcony, overlooking the pond where ducks were settling for the night, and I held the photograph of Aliner I keep on the side table. "He's learning," I said to her, slowly, painfully, but learning. The sunset burned orange and pink across the water. I thought about the boy who used to ride on my shoulders at the county fair, the teenager I taught to drive, the man who'd lost himself somewhere in the pursuit of more. I couldn't give him the inheritance back. That was sealed, and the scholarships were already helping nursing students who would never know my name. But I could leave a door open. Not wide, not unlocked, just unbarred. I went inside, sat at my small desk, and wrote a reply. I told him I'd received his letter. I told him I was proud of the progress he was making. And I told him I'd be at the next recital, same seat, same row, if he wanted to sit beside me. I sealed the envelope and set it by my keys for the morning post. Then I turned off the lights and stood for a moment in the quiet condo that was mine, fully mine, bought with clarity and grief and the fierce, quiet power of a man who refused to be discarded. Aliner's photograph smiled at me from the mantel. I smiled back, and the scar across my chest pulled just enough to remind me it was there, proof that the heart beneath it still beat strongly, still capable of both pain and grace.